Hi everybody, this is Alchemist2 and I'm back again with another book review. Recently I finished the second book in the Land of Stories called The Enchantress Returns. It's written by Colfer. And if you've read the first book, this is actually so much better than the first book. You can tell that the first book was well, I'm not sure how else to put it, but the very first book he's ever written. And the second book actually shows more of a growth in his writing style, but still, Chris, I feel, has an excellent attention to detail, and he paints these really elaborate word pictures. And I like his humor and his style and the way that he he weaves this story in the fairy tale realm, and he takes characters that we're all used to and he gives them kind of a different sort of spin. It's sort of like Once Upon a Time, if you've ever watched that show. It's very reminiscent of that, but in and of itself, it's its own story. It doesn't take anything from Once Upon a Time. It stands on its own. And as far as books are concerned, if you like fairy tales like I do, then I'm pretty sure that you're going to like this book because it's very short. You can get through it in a day, but as for me, I was at work and it only took me 4 days to get through it, and I couldn't put it down. I was completely mesmerized by it. I was transfixed, and I love the story of the brother and sister, and I just thought that the sister, her ending, so to speak, it really wasn't an ending. I'm not going to go into that because it's a huge spoiler alert, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to ruin a perfectly good book. It is a revelation, I think, what occurs with her character, and it leads room for more Land of Stories books, I do believe, and in fact it leaves it wide open for Chris to write another Land of Stories, which I hope to God he does. I think that this is the best book that he's written so far, and I'm not sure who the illustrator is, but it's absolutely beautiful. If I can find some illustrations here, but I really like the artwork. I'm not sure if you can see that. That's near the end of the book, but if you don't mind, I'm actually going to be doing some reading here, and you know, this is the prologue, so I'm hoping that it doesn't give too much away, but this is what you're in for if you pick up this book. Prologue: The Rise and the Return. The East was in a period of great celebration. Daily parades marched through the village streets. Every home and shop was decorated in colorful banners and wreaths, and handfuls of flower petals were thrown and floated through the air. Each citizen smiled, proud of what they had recently accomplished. It had taken over a decade for the sleeping kingdom to fully recover from the horrific sleeping curse of the past, but at last it had restored itself to the prosperous nation it had been before. The people of the East charged into the future, reclaiming their home as the Eastern Kingdom. A week's worth of celebrations concluded in the great hall of Queen Sleeping Beauty's castle. It was so crowded the entire kingdom seemed to be there. Many had to stand or sit or on windowsills. The Queen herself, her husband, King Chase, and their royal advisor sat on the high table overlooking the festivities. A small performance was taking place in the center of the hall. Thespians reenacted Sleeping Beauty's christening, portraying the fairies who had blessed her and the evil Enchantress who had cursed her to die after pricking her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel. Luckily, another fairy reformed the curse, so when the princess eventually pricked her finger, she and the entire kingdom simply went to sleep. They slept for 100 years, and the performers took great delight in recreating the moment King Chase kissed her and awoke them all. "I think it's time we disposed our little gifts from the Queen," a woman shouted from the back of the hall. She stood up on a table and cheerfully gestured to her wrist. Everyone in the kingdom wore flexible bands around their wrists made from tree sap. In years prior, Queen Sleeping Beauty had instructed them to snap their wrists with snap their wrists with them whenever they felt unnecessary fatigue. The bands helped the citizens stay awake, fighting off the lingering effects of the curse. Fortunately, the bands weren't needed anymore. Everyone in the Great Hall ripped them off their wrists and threw them happily in the air. "Your Majesty, won't you tell us again where you learned a trick like that?" a man asked the Queen about the bands. "You'll think strangely of me when I tell you," Sleeping Beauty said. "It was from a child. He and his sister were visiting the castle a year ago. He said that he had used a band to keep himself awake in school and suggested the king to try it." "Remarkable," the man said and laughed with her. "Fascinating, isn't it? I believe the most extraordinary ideas come from children," the Queen said. "If only we could all be so perceptive, we would find the simplest solution to the greatest problems are right under our noses." Sleeping Beauty lightly tapped the side of a glass with a spoon and addressed the eager people. "My friends," Sleeping Beauty said, raising her glass, "today marks a very special day in our history and even a better day in our future. As of this morning, our kingdom's trading deals, crop production, and overall consciousness have not only been restored but improved since the sleeping curses cast upon this land." Her people cheered so loudly the castle shook with joy. Sleeping Beauty looked to her side and shared a warm smile with her husband. "We should not forget the horrible curse of the past, but when we look back upon the dark time, let us remember how we triumphed over it," Sleeping Beauty continued. Small tears formed in her eyes. "Let it be a warning to all who try to interfere with our prosperity. The Eastern Kingdom is here to stay and stands united against any force of evil that gets in our way." An approving roar was so loud it actually knocked a man off the windowsill he sat on. "I have never been prouder to be among you tonight. Here's to you," the jubilant Queen said, and the room joined her in sipping from their glasses. "All hail Queen Beauty!" a man in the middle of the hall shouted. "All hail the Queen!" The rest cheered with him. "All hail the Queen! All hail the Queen!" Sleeping Beauty waved at them graciously and took a seat. The festivities continued into the night, but just before midnight the Queen was overcome by a strange sensation, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. "Well, isn't that bizarre?" Sleeping Beauty said to herself, looking off into the distance with a smirk. "Is there something wrong, my love?" King Chase asked. Sleeping Beauty looked and headed toward the staircase behind them. "You'll have to excuse me, dear," the Queen said to her husband. "I'm rather sleepy." She was just as surprised to say it as he was to hear it, because Sleeping Beauty hadn't slept in years. The Queen had made a promise to her people that she wouldn't rest until the kingdom was properly restored. Now, looking around all the joyous faces in the hall, both the King and the Queen knew that the promise had been fulfilled. "Good night, my love. Sleep well," King Chase said and kissed her hand. In her chambers, the Queen changed into her favorite nightgown and slipped into her bed for the first time in over a decade. She felt as if she were being reunited with old friends. She hadn't forgotten the feeling of the cool sheets against her legs and her arms, the softness of her pillow, and the sinking sensation as she settled into the mattress. The sounds of celebration could be heard in the Queen's chambers, but they were actually soothing to her. Sleeping Beauty took a deep breath and fell into a very deep sleep, almost so deep as the one during the 100 Years' Curse, except that she knew that she could awaken any time she wished. When King Chase joined her later, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of his wife peacefully sleeping. He hadn't seen her look this way since the day he saw her for the first time. In the Great Hall, the celebration finally concluded. The lamps and fireplaces were extinguished throughout the castle. The servants finished cleaning up and were dismissed to their quarters. All was finally quiet in the castle, but a few hours before dawn, the silence was broken. Sleeping Beauty and King Chase were awoken by a thunderous banging on the chamber door. The King and Queen instantly sat up. "Your Majesty!" a man shouted from the other side of the door. "Forgive me, but we must come inside." The door burst open and the royal advisor ran into the room, followed by a dozen suited guards. They surrounded the bed. "What on earth is going on?" King Chase yelled. "How dare you barge into our—" "I'm so sorry, Your Highness, but we must get the Queen to safety immediately." "Safety?" the Queen asked. "We'll explain on the way there, Your Majesty," the advisor said. "But right now you must get into the carriage as fast as possible. Only you. Traveling alone will be much less conspicuous than the carriage transporting you and the king." The advisor looked at her with frantic eyes, begging her to oblige. The Queen froze. "Chase?" Sleeping Beauty looked at her husband. She wasn't sure what to do. The King was at a loss for words. "If they say you need to go, you must go," was all he could muster. "I cannot leave my people," Sleeping Beauty said. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, you're no good to anyone dead," the advisor said. Sleeping Beauty felt the pit in her stomach drop. What did he mean, dead? Before Sleeping Beauty knew it, the guards had lifted her out of bed and onto her feet. They quickly escorted her and the advisor out to the door. She didn't even get to say goodbye. They rushed down a spiral staircase to lower levels of the castle. The stone steps were rough on the queen's bare feet. "Someone please tell me what's happening," Sleeping Beauty said. "We must get you out of the kingdom as quickly as possible," the advisor said. "Why?" she asked, starting to fight the guards off escorting her. No one replied, so she stopped in the middle of the stairs, solid as a rock. "I won't move another step until someone informs me. I am the queen. I have the right to know." The advisor's face went pale. "I don't mean to alarm you anymore, Your Majesty," he said, his jaw quivering. But shortly after midnight, after all the guests had gone home, 2 soldiers on duty near the front of the castle witnessed a bright flash of light, and a spinning wheel appeared out of thin air. Sleeping Beauty's eyes grew wide, and the color faded from her face. "They didn't think it was anything serious. A foolish prank to spoil our party this evening, perhaps," he continued. The soldiers went to inspect the spinning wheel, and it burst into flames. As soon as it did, something else happened. "And what was that?" she said. "The vines and thorn bushes that covered the castle during the sleeping curse, the plants that were cleared out and dumped in the thornbush pit are growing back," he told her. "I've never seen anything grow so fast. Nearly half of the castle is covered already. The plants are consuming the entire kingdom." "Are you telling me that the curse in the thornbush pit has spread throughout the kingdom?" Sleeping Beauty asked. "No, Your Majesty," the advisor said with a heavy gulp. "That was just an old witch's curse. This is dark magic. Very powerful dark magic. The kind our kingdom has only been exposed to once before." "No," Sleeping Beauty gasped and covered her mouth. "You don't mean—" "Yes, I'm afraid so," the advisor said. Just hold on a minute. Okay. Oops. I didn't mean to put caps lock on, but he kept on pestering me, so sorry about that. Anyway. "Yes, I'm afraid so," the advisor said. "Now please cooperate with us. We must get you out of the kingdom as quickly as possible." The guards grabbed hold of the queen, and they traveled deeper into the castle. This time she did not fight them. They ran down the stairs until there were no more stairs to descend. They shot through a pair of wooden doors, and Sleeping Beauty found herself in the castle stables. Hold on. Sorry about this, guys. Okay, where am I? Ugh! He's really starting to annoy me. I am so sorry about this, everybody. Okay. Sorry. The guards grabbed hold of the queen. Again, they traveled deeper to the castle. This time, she did not fight them. They ran down the stairs until there were no more stairs to descend. They shot through a pair of wooden doors, and Sleeping Beauty found herself in the castle stables. There were 4 carriages in front of her. Each was circled by a dozen soldiers on horses ready to depart at any second. 3 of the carriages were bright and golden, of the queen's personal collection, but she was escorted to the 4th, a small, dull, and unassuming one. The soldiers surrounding this carriage weren't dressed in armor like the others, but were disguised as farmers and townspeople. The guards lifted the queen inside it. There was barely enough room inside for her to sit. "And my husband?" Sleeping Beauty asked as she put a hand out to prevent them from shutting the door behind her. "He'll be all right, ma'am," the advisor said. "The king and I will be traveling as soon as we send out the decoy carriages. We've had this planned in the event the castle should ever be under attack. Trust me, it's the safest way." "I never authorized such plans," Sleeping Beauty said. "No, it was your parents' order," the advisor said. "It was one of the last things they instructed before they died." This news made the queen's heart pound even harder. Her parents had spent the majority of their lives trying to protect her, and even in death they were still trying. "Where am I going?" she asked. "The fairy kingdom for now," the advisor said. "You'll be safest with the fairy council. The decoy carriages will be sent in other directions as a distraction. Now you must hurry." He gently pushed her the rest of the way inside and shut the carriage door firmly behind her. Even the dozen guards surrounding her small carriage did little to comfort her. She knew the situation was beyond their ability to protect her. The advisor nodded to the decoy carriages, and they set off. A few moments later, he nodded to her driver and said, like a cannonball, the Queen's carriage shot off into the night, the horses galloping at full speed. Through her carriage's tiny window, Sleeping Beauty saw the horrors that the advisor had described to her. Scattered all across the castle grounds, she saw soldiers and servants fighting off rogue thorn bushes and vines growing around them. The plants grew straight out of the ground and attacked them like serpents wrapping around their prey. The vines crept up the side of the castle, breaking through the windows and pulling people out, dangling them hundreds of feet in the air. Thorns and vines shot out of the ground toward Sleeping Beauty's carriage, but the soldiers were quick to slice them with their swords. Queen Sleeping Beauty had never felt so helpless in her life. She saw villagers, some within reach of her carriage, fall victim to leafy monsters. There was nothing she could do to help them. All she could do was watch and hope that she could find help once she reached the fairy kingdom. The guilt of leaving her husband and kingdom behind weighed heavily on her, but her advisor was right. She'd be no good to anyone dead. The castle grew smaller and smaller behind her as the carriage traveled away from the devastation. Soon they were passing through a forest, and all the Queen could see outside were dark trees around them for miles. Even after an hour of traveling, Sleeping Beauty was as scared as ever. She kept whispering to herself under her breath, "We're almost there. We're almost there," though she had no idea how close they were. Suddenly, a high-pitched whooshing sound came from the trees. Sleeping Beauty looked out of the window just in time to see a soldier and his horse thrown high into the forest beside the path. Another whooshing sound swooped toward them, and another soldier and his horse were thrown into the trees on the other side of the path. They had been found. Every other second was filled with terrified cries of the soldiers and horses as they were flung into the forest. Whatever was out there was picking them off, one by one. Sleeping Beauty crouched down, trembling, on the floorboard of her carriage. She knew it was only a matter of time before the soldiers were gone. One final swoop took the remaining horses and soldiers with it, their cries echoing in the night. Their carriage crashed to the ground, falling on its side and skidding across the ground until coming to a stop. Everything was quiet in the forest now. There wasn't a sound of the wounded soldiers or horses to be heard. The Queen was all alone. Sleeping Beauty crawled through the carriage door and carefully made her way down to the ground. She was limping and clutched her left wrist, but so frightened she barely felt her injuries. Was the attack over? Could she safely call for help or search for survivors? Surely, if whatever was out there wanted her dead, she would have been killed by now. Sleeping Beauty was just about to call for help when a blinding flash of violet light filled the forest. The Queen screamed and fell to the ground, covering her face, but the flash lasted only a second. She smelled smoke and got to her feet and looked around. The entire forest was ablaze, and every tree had been turned into a spinning wheel. There was no denying it now. The kingdom's greatest fear had come true. The Enchantress, Sleeping Beauty whispered to herself. "She's back."